Good afternoon, everybody, for this new how to effectively respond to verbal criticism workshop. I know for Toastmasters, criticism is a very important thing. They make me not sleep at night. After I give a sleep, after I give a speech based on the criticism and the praises that I get, it depends if I sleep or not. Now, over the years, we all have our own experiences on criticism and communications. Even though we speak the same language, it's almost impossible to understand what the other guy is saying. Being an engineer, I made a truth table to how to effectively communicate. I am going to share it.
Toastmasters? So don't you have work to do?
Huh?
Don't you have work to do?
Can you guys see my slides?
Yes.
Okay. Now, being an engineer, I made these slides. This is just similar to our AND and OR gate logic. You know, most of the time I am right, my wife is right, we don't know who is right, we don't know how to communicate. So we made up this truth table, and whenever we are in doubt, we just refer to this truth table and take a decision. You know, we can separate water and milk. So I am Ravi and wife, and the third column is result. Okay. Now let's look at the first one. First case, like in digital logic, 0, 0, 0, 1, 1, 0 thing. So if I am wrong and my wife is right, this is pretty easy. My wife is right. Now the second one. If we both are right, this is also a little bit easy. Wife is right. The third one. If I am right and my wife is wrong, wife is still right. And the fourth one. If we both are wrong, I am wrong. Now, this has helped me a lot, but this does not get me along too far. Today's workshop is about not needing those slides and master how to do it. Now, welcome me to introduce our guest today. Our guest today is Arnold Buss. He's a long-time Toastmaster and a distinguished Toastmaster. Apart from his day job as a technical computer simulation, teaching computer simulations, he offers seminars and workshops on effective communication and relationship building. He has tried to find a balance between logical part of your brain with the emotional part, since it is this balance that's helped achieve the kind and love relationships that we all desire. He also facilitates individuals and couples with interpersonal communication issues. Oh my God, I'm going to talk to him after the class. Now, please welcome me, Arnold Buss. Arnold Buss.
Thank you, Ravi, for that wonderful introduction. I'm going to share my screen. As Ravi said, this workshop is about how to effectively respond to verbal criticism. Now, normally when I give a workshop like this, we are in a room, and sometimes you may not be familiar with the room. Nevertheless, throughout the workshop, feel free to get up and move around. Try not to disrupt things, although I will entertain questions throughout. If something comes up and you have a question, then please raise your hand and Abhijit will handle all of that. Don't hesitate to ask questions throughout this. Usually in a workshop, of course, I have to point out where the facilities are. So where you are, the restroom is probably down hall and to the left. So just so we're clear about that. Now, sometimes we experience verbal criticism. Now, what I'm talking about is verbal criticism, I'm not talking about things like physical assault. I'm not talking about things like abuse. But nevertheless, in the course of any relationship, whether it's an intimate relationship, a friendship, a colleague, a manager, a subordinate, or even just a passing acquaintance, there are times when we don't get along. As Robbie was mentioning in his truth table, especially for a couple in a partnership, there are situations where one person seems to always be right. As some women say, well, I was looking for Mr. Right, but I found Mr. Always Right. Now, see, the most important thing is the relationship, regardless of what that relationship is. In order to be effective, and I emphasize the word effective, in order to be effective, the relationship needs to take precedence over any particular conflict there is. And here's a newsflash. If you're in any kind of relationship, there's going to be conflict. If you're in a relationship and there's never any conflict, then either somebody's not showing up or somebody's just being overly aggressive. How does that conflict get resolved for the sake of the relationship? Now, it may seem useful to have the yes dear approach to any kind of conflict, as Robbie's truth table illustrated, and yet that turns out to not be the best thing for the relationship, the most effective thing. And again, I emphasize the word effective. It's not a matter of what's good or bad, right or wrong. It's what is helpful for the relationship. Now, the thing about verbal criticism is that verbal criticism is what John Gottman calls one of the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse. He's a renowned marriage therapist and expert, and criticism is one of the things that destroys relationships, especially if it's not resolved over time. So to start with, I'm going to put up a few sentences or statements that you may have heard, or if you haven't heard them, take a few moments and think of how you would reply. How would you reply if you heard something like this? That's a stupid idea. Now, I'm sure everybody here has had nothing but wonderful ideas, so you would never hear this, but trust me, it gets said. So if you heard, that's a stupid idea, how would you respond to that? Just take a moment to think about that. Or what about this one? You're always late. Now, I'm sure everybody here is always on time, so you would never hear that. But just on the off chance that you may hear that, or maybe you say that, how would you respond if you heard, you're always late? What about this one? Have you ever had a conversation and you've either said or heard, you're not listening to me? How would you respond to that? What about this one? You're always criticizing me. Now, I'm sure everybody here is never in a situation where they're ever criticizing anybody else. Nevertheless, have you ever heard something like this, even though you felt that you've never criticized? What about this? If your partner says, you never take me anywhere. So I'd like you to just take a few minutes, just a few moments, think about how you would respond. Okay, would anybody like to offer what they would say to any one of these? Now let's not all speak at once. So Abhijit, has anybody offered to?
Let me see. How much will be the monthly
Say
with that?
something.
With 510 and 2.49? Did you tell you that?
Sorry. Hello.
Hello, go ahead, please.
Okay. So for the first one, I might say that, yeah, it does sound like, it may sound like that, but I agree that it needs some work to make it better.
Okay, not bad.
Okay.
Anybody else?
I would say, if somebody says, that's a stupid idea, I know, but hear me out.
Not bad.
I can try.
Yeah.
So for that's a stupid idea, I would say, I know, that's why I brought it to you for improvement.
Yeah.
For you're always late, I would say, so you would like me to be on time next time?
Excellent. Yeah, I can hear that some of you may not need this class, so we can end it early.
So what about this? That's a stupid idea. It's better than yours.
Okay, well, I'll go for it. You are not listening to me. Well, I listen to people who talk nicely or who are not criticizing, something like that.
Okay. Yeah, these are all very reasonable things, and I want to. Oh, here's you don't know what you're talking about. What about that?
Well, here's what I would do. You know, let's say any of these, let's say it's a stupid idea. Before I say anything, I would try to get in touch with how I feel in this moment about what has just happened. Because I know that if I just respond like with anger, it won't go anywhere. So first of all, I need to kind of get in touch with how I feel hearing this message and give myself a little bit of empathy. And then after that, I might be able to get in touch with, wonder what's going on here for this other person that they might be saying this, wonder what they want. What is it they're going for? There's upset about something, I'll give a guess of what it is. So I can try to put myself in their shoes.
Oh, beautiful.
I agree with that. And I think besides just getting connected with how we're feeling, it's also important to clarify. A lot of times heated debates or heated conversation happens is because we are making an assumption of what each other is saying. Like that's a stupid idea, for example. Stupid could really be defined as many things. You don't know what you're talking about. Sounds pretty charged, but that might be referring to something else that's more underlying that have not been surfaced yet. So, yes.
Yeah, these are two absolutely excellent points, and especially well, I'm going to talk about some ineffective ways of responding to this, but when we get to the more effective ones, you basically put your finger on what the essential idea is. And remember what I said, the most important thing in this person that you're hearing from is the relationship. So how could you respond in such a way that would enhance the relationship? Oops, no. Okay, so here, there is no lack of so-called experts when it comes to this. And when I look out at what many of these so-called experts teach, I found each of these points. One was to agree. And in fact, you know, what's wrong with agreeing? You know, that was a stupid idea. Yeah, that was a stupid idea. Well, is that effective? In my approach, I find that to be ineffective. Or to disagree. Again, some of the responses were disagreeing. And again, to disagree is to not be effective. Now, some recommend they ask questions, and that kind of taps into what some of the things that you were mentioning. Find out what's going on with the other person. Here's the problem with that. That sounds like a great idea. And I sometimes question whether these so-called experts have actually done what I call eating your own dog food. That is, have they actually tried these things? And here's the thing, if somebody is criticizing you, it means that there's something going on for them. And both Bob and whoever else was mentioning alluded to that. In other words, there's something going on in that other person. And so until I can find out what that thing is, then I'm not going to really be effective. So, and in that context, if somebody's criticizing me like that, then they're not going to be open to hearing questions. In that context, hearing questions is going to sound like an interrogation. The other interesting thing, and I'm going to completely turn this on its head, is they say, oh, we always use I, never say you. Never say you. And advice is going to be the complete opposite. Never say I, always say you. And we'll see what that's about. Or to apologize. Apologizing. Now, we'll say, well, what's wrong with apologizing? Well, there's nothing wrong with apologizing. But if you immediately apologize, then what the message it sends is that you're really not interested in addressing the issue, as you just want to move on and sweep it under the rug. So an immediate apology is very ineffective. I saw one that said, wait before responding, maybe 24 hours before responding. What's ineffective about that is if somebody's criticizing you, there is something going on for them in this moment. And if you don't respond in this moment, it's not going to be effectively addressed. So here's the key insight, and this is something that was kind of touched on, is that if they're criticizing you, the chances are that the emotion that they're feeling is something like anger or one of its synonyms, something like anger, upset. But the insight about anger is that anger is not really a primary feeling. It sits on top of other feelings like fear or hurt, embarrassment, concern, disappointment. And they all sit on a lack of trust of getting our needs met. In other words, why is this person criticizing instead of effectively trying to get their needs met? Think of a Toastmasters evaluation. Now, you see, in Toastmasters evaluation, there really isn't any criticism. Instead, what's offered are suggestions for improvement. And that may sound like a semantic difference, but it's a really big difference. I mean, think of the difference between, that was a really terrible speech versus, that speech might have been more effective if you had used more vocal variety, or if at this point you had said this instead of that. There is a huge difference between criticism and, and suggestions for improvement. But getting back to this, if somebody is criticizing, it means that there's something going on for them, but what is presenting for them is not that anger tip of the iceberg. See, this is like an iceberg. What you see is the anger. What's under the surface are all these other feelings. So I've talked about what are some ineffective ways, and the effective way is what I call validate. And this was alluded to and touched on. And so the idea is to find out what is going on, to get beneath the anger, get beneath that iceberg, to find out what is really going on for this person. So now some important things about what validate is. Validate means that you are validating where that person is. It doesn't mean agreeing. As I said, agreeing is ineffective in that moment. We're not agreeing with it, but we're validating their point of view. Validating, it doesn't parrot. It doesn't sort of say, if you echo back to somebody the exact words that they're saying, then it comes across as because like you're mocking them. What it does do is to validate, you want to reflect the speaker's message back to them, and it requires decoding. And in one of the responses that I heard was a very effective one in that. When they said that you're always late, somebody said, so you want me to be on time. See, that was decoding the message. See, the word said, you're late, you're always late, but that person really effectively decoded what the message was. That is, what is it they want? And the approach that I advocate, that I found to be the most effective, I call it tracking. Now, you may have heard other approaches to listen, effective listening. Active listening is probably the most popular phrase. I was introduced to active listening by a marriage counselor that I went to with my wife many years ago. And I found, or we both found it to not be a particularly effective way of dealing with things when we weren't in the counselor's office. So all of the approaches that I've studied, with the exception of tracking, work well if there's a counselor or a therapist in there to guide. But once you get home and it's just the two of you, then a lot of those approaches tend to go out the window. Now, tracking is something that it's a skill that for some reason we don't seem to learn. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about just some basic tracking, which is when you're in a non-confrontational situation. But it also applies to a confrontational one. We'll get to that. And so the first, if you're familiar with active listening, their boilerplate phrase is, "I hear you say," or or what I think you're saying, or what you seem to say. And the problem with that is that that's like waving a red flag that says, I'm using a technique on you, and nobody likes to have a technique used on them. So instead, and this is the basic part. Like this is like when you're learning scales when you're learning a musical instrument. So instead of saying, "I hear you say," the response that I found to be most effective is, "So you." In other words, you begin with the response with "so you," and then see what comes next. Just a great example, again, was given earlier with the "you're always late," "so you want me to be always on time." So and the power of this phrase is that it's more conversational, believe it or not. Focus on the message and not on the words, and that was very effectively done. Now, back on the suggestion about kind of being centered and understanding what your feelings are, there's a wonderful acronym called QTIP, which stands for quit taking it personally. In other words, whenever you hear criticism, it isn't about you. It's about something going on for the other person, and it is never about you, never about you. Now, that's not to say that you don't have any responsibility. I'm not advocating abrogating your responsibility for something that you may have done. However, if that person were to be effective rather than criticizing, they would not be criticized. Criticism is the most ineffective way to get your needs met. And there is a way to get your needs met in a more effective way, which is complementary to what I'm talking about today. And you'll have to come to one of my workshops to learn about that. And the thing is that at first it will seem unnatural and uncomfortable. It did for me when I was first learning about this. And especially because it may seem, if you try to apply this, some of the first feedback that I got when I was doing it in a very awkward way is they're saying, "Oh, well, why are you talking so weirdly? What's going on? Why are you talking like that?" So it does require some practice to become natural, but when it is mastered, it makes a huge difference. So tracking criticism does require a certain mastery of this. Okay, I want to talk a little bit about when you're trying to decode the message, two operative words are always and never. And the thing about always and never, okay, there's a question, Robbie?
Yes, yeah.
Yes, I understand these tips, but in the moment, how do you practice them? It's almost tough. You can't remember these things whenever you are about to start a conversation. How do I make these things part of my DNA? How do I practice them?
Wonderful question. And I think it gets back to, well, for me, I can just tell you, for me, it involved basically inner work that I did. Anytime that I take criticism personally, it's because of some wounded place in myself that I haven't healed yet. And so the beauty of this is that even when when I am not able to respond in the moment, if I can do what's sometimes called an after action review, as it were, every criticism that I take personally is a pointer to a wounded place in myself that I haven't healed yet.
Can you explain that?
Well,
with an example.
Well, for example, okay, so you're not listening to me. And you say, well, that if I take that personally, I want to say, you know, well, I am too listening to you. What the wound in me that points to is okay, maybe I'm not as effective at this as I think I am. Maybe I'm not as loving a person, as heart-centered a person as I think I am. Of course, now in that situation, I'm say, well, I was too listening to you. And of course, what do they say next? Well, what did I just say? Right? And then I repeat back word for word everything that my wife said, word for word. And that makes her happy, right? Never. It never makes them happy. Why? Because they were probably noticing something that was going on. They probably felt that I wasn't giving my full attention. So again, to answer your question, that's really just an ongoing process. And what I would encourage is that anytime that you have had an interaction that has gone, south, or it hasn't gone as effectively as you would like, look to yourself in, what was it about that didn't feel okay? Because here's the thing is that you are absolutely always perfectly imperfect and perfectly okay. In other words, there is really nothing that somebody else can do that can make me feel anything. And so if somebody says something and I react with a painful feeling, that's because there is some wounded place in myself that is causing that reaction. The other person can't make me feel anything. You say, well, the therapists like to say, how did that make you feel? And that is like fingers on nails on a blackboard to me, because nothing can make you feel anything. I hope I addressed the question at least a little bit. So yeah, always and never. Now those are operative words. Now here's the thing: is that if you want to get to these words, rarely, in fact, I would say never, mean literally. In other words, if I say you're always late, and I have been on time one time, then that is a false statement. And and if my wife says you never take me anywhere, and I says, well, I took you out to dinner last year. Again, it's a false statement because never, but that is not what people mean. People use always and never, just like literally. They use literally to mean figuratively. I literally died. Well, no, you didn't literally die. What's ineffective is to argue the truth of it, because if something is, all it takes is one counterexample for always or never to be false. But what is more effective is to validate the intent of the emphasis of it. In other words, if they say you never take me anywhere, they're not saying you never took me anywhere. They're saying that I would like to go out more often than has been happening, and it hasn't been happening. or you're always late. Well, it's been happening more often than you feel comfortable with. And, you know, and as the person before said, and you want to be sure that that appointments are always kept on time. You know, here's the thing is that how you respond effectively depends on the energy of the criticism. If it is delivered, and just to make it simple, there is low energy and there's relatively high energy. So in the case of low energy criticism, there is less urgency on the part of the person, and yet, you know, words can still be very painful and stinging. But in the case of low energy criticism, what you want to do is you want to take your time to get to the bottom of their message. And this is something that some of you were mentioning earlier, and as absolutely what I found to be effective. So what you want to do is you want to be willing to hear and validate when you disagree. That is, your disagreement, you want to take your disagreement, put it aside. You're again, remember, validating does not mean you're agreeing. Validating means you are trying to get to the bottom of what is going on with that other person. Now, you do want to acknowledge points of agreement without making yourself wrong. So say that was a stupid idea. It says, yeah, that was a stupid idea. Well, you're making yourself wrong there. And the idea, the other concept, the key concept is this thing called a lookup. You want to keep validating them as long as they are kind of in that critical place until they look up. And what is a lookup? A lookup is when they finally feel heard. They really feel heard. And it's an indication that they are ready for a resolution. Now, when the criticism is high energy, then the problem is if you want to take your time to get to the bottom message, you will drive them crazy. When the energy is high, that means that they are impatient to get to the bottom line. But the advantage of this is that when they are stating, you know, listen to the difference between, you know, you're always late or you're always late. You hear those are two very, very different messages. Okay, so in the first case, I can take my time and get to the bottom of what's really going on for them. In the second one, they are impatient to get to the bottom line. But the advantage is that when they are expressing it with that much energy, that they are basically, they're telling you exactly what they want. And the key phrase is, so you want. So, and that was illustrated beautifully before. So you want to be assured that all appointments will be kept on time from now on. So you're not, so you're not listening to me, so you want to make sure that everything that you say is being heard and understood. You never take me anywhere. So you want to go out right now. Now, here's the thing and this was alluded to before, is that overcoming your own fight flight reaction, like when you get that in your face, it is hard not to have a fight flight reaction. Question.
There's a question here. Cedric, you have a question? Go ahead.
Arnie, I must say that I cheated because I took your previous workshop, so I knew how to answer that question, right, of being late. But I also want to mention that I've been trying this, and the same way that you said that other techniques sound like somebody is applying a technique on you, this one does too. People have told me, don't use so you me, don't you do that so you thing again, because it doesn't feel natural. And if you say, so you want me to listen to everything you're saying and you want to be heard, it's like, I stopped doing that because that's not getting to the point. So I just want to mention that this does feel like another technique. Is there anything we can do to make it not sound like that?
Well, what you say, here's the thing is that only when the other person looks up are they open to hearing anything. So when somebody kind of comes at you that way, then that's another criticism to be validated. So so there's something about what you're hearing that feels uncomfortable. It feels like you're being manipulated in some way. So in other words, if they're kind of, you know, and then the idea is to validate the fact that they feel that a technique is being used on them. And the thing is that when they, you know, when they kind of feel at least heard about that, then you can say, well, this is something that I'm learning, and you know, it's going to feel a little bit unnatural at first, and the intent is to really hear what's being said.
Okay. Yeah. Thanks.
So, that was my experience as well when I was first learning this.
Yeah, and this is the same thing that I hear from active listening or nonviolent communication teachings, where they say, well, you're reflecting it back. So you're saying, I hear you say this, I hear you say that. And initially people will feel uncomfortable, and you tell them it will feel uncomfortable at first, but you'll get used to it. So it's okay. It sounds similar in terms of reception of this, or maybe we should mix it up, mix and match with other techniques, so it's not always the same.
Well, yeah, see, the so you is like, again, like a musical scale. That's something where what I find useful about that is just to try to refocus your attention on how to respond in the moment. In the moment, you want to be effective. It needs to be conversational and not manipulative. And what I've studied both nonviolent communication and active listening, and the problem that I found with both of them, and they both have wonderful, their meta is wonderful. Their objectives are absolutely 100% in accord with what I preach. And in a normal conversation, it is very, they come across as being stylized and unnatural. The thing about the tracking that I teach is that once it becomes more conversational and natural, then it just becomes another way of responding, and doesn't kind of stand out as a technique. So I just would encourage you to, you know, to try responding without the so you, if you feel comfortable enough. It's not necessary. It's helpful as just sort of a bit of scaffolding to try to focus on what's, you know, on how to respond. So
Can I just chime in?
Without the so you. Yes.
Can I just chime in? This is Shanti. I was just wanting to check with you if when a question like that is asked, maybe get into a little bit of discussion as to, I mean, maybe like, say, for example, it says, you don't take me more often, right? Something like that. The question was, you never take me out or whatever. And then the person who's listening can say, I thought we just went out that day or whatever, because the other person thinks that it's not correct or didn't agree, but then because they're confused, right? Because we just went out. So maybe have that discussion, and then maybe remind the person that yes, we did, or agree to that and say, maybe I guess I should remember to take you out more often if it indeed was true, right? So have the discussion might be a better idea, isn't it? To clarify what exactly is there in the other person's mind, or for me to clarify that too, because I may be wrong, the listener may be wrong too.
Well, those are very excellent points. And in that moment, to say, you know, just for me, what I have found is that right or wrong is not the critical thing. The critical thing is what the other person feels. And so I may have taken my wife out last night, and if she says you never take me anywhere, and I remind her that I took her out last night or last week or whenever, then that's disagreeing with what she's saying. And the thing is I mean, you're right, that at some point there needs to be a discussion and some kind of resolution. Until my experience has been that you're not going to be able to have that discussion until the person who's criticizing does feel heard. So in other words, this would be a prelude to that discussion. And until then, my experience is just it's not going to be as effective.
Arnie, I'd like to jump in here. I think if you use any kind of stock phrase like "so you want," there's nothing magical about it. It's just a mechanism for you to try to do what you're saying, to track them. And so if someone criticizes that, they object to that, I think it's useful to say, well, here's what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to understand you. This is what my goal is. I'm really trying to understand what it is you want and what's going on for you. And I just use that phrase for, I don't have to use that phrase. I can use any phrase, but my goal is to understand you. Can you explain yourself a little bit more so I get it? If you explain it that way, people are very happy because they want you to understand them. That's their goal. In other words, you're aligning what you're saying with what they want.
Sure, yeah, that's you know, my what I mean, what for me the key phrase is effective. So whatever you find to be effective works. You know, whatever works. What I've found, you know, I found that the "so you want" is I have just found it to be the most effective way to begin a response to somebody who's coming at me with high energy.
Yeah, I understand, but this person said that it didn't work for them, so I was suggesting another approach.
Oh, sure, yeah.
There are two more questions. Nicole,
Okay.
you have a question?
Well, it's very similar to what Bob was saying, that so you want to go out more often if it sounds like it's, you know, canned, and, you know, tying it in with Arnie is that at the end of the day, finding that bit of language that you find that works with that person. And if you see them roll their eyes as soon as you start to say "so you want," may start that way to state experience-wise from Arnie that you want to understand what they want, but then clarify, like Bob said, at the end of the day, I'm trying to truly understand what will make you happy. And combining those two tactics, if you will, because they are tactics, personally, I found that to be more effective for me, to say, "so you want me to not interrupt you. I want you to be happy."
Yeah, that's a very good point. One thing I would point out is that, you know, we're all sitting here, none of us seem to be particularly emotional. When somebody is coming at you with high energy criticism, they are very emotional. And in that emotion, and this has just been my experience, that their reaction is going to be very different than what you're going to envision here sitting very calmly. And in that, you know, the reason this key phrase, "so you want," the reason I found that to be most effective is because for somebody who is in the depths or you know, in the throes of that angry reaction, this, again, if this is delivered with a corresponding energy that connects with that person, I have found it nearly impossible for the other person to stay angry. And just consider the possibility that what you're thinking about how somebody might react when in a calm moment as we are now versus in an emotional moment as in that moment, as would happen then, is very, very different. And again, just don't take my word for it. Just, you know, try it.
Good point.
There is one more question, Arnie.
Okay.
sometimes we need some time to follow the instructions to get to the bottom of the message. What is the best idea or way to handle this situation? Or yeah.
Well, let me ask: is there something in particular that the questioner has in mind?
Madhukar, you want to ask the question? Do you have anything particular in mind?
Yeah, sometimes we might need to think about the message, right? What they're saying, and we might need the time to decide whether he's correct or not, he or she is correct or not, right? In that case, we might. It's ineffective steps. You said we don't need to wait for the response, right? How we can do that in effective way to respond in instantly, and how we can decide, think about it.
Well, I have a slightly different take on, deciding whether they're right or wrong in the first response is, I found to not be a particularly effective way of dealing with that situation. Because the issue is not whether they're right or wrong. Again, if somebody is being effective in trying to affect some kind of change in the other person, there are ways of doing it without making me wrong, without making the other person wrong. A criticism is making the other person wrong. And so the issue in a criticism is not the right or wrongness of it. It's the underlying message is. And that's what this tracking is all about. In other words, tracking is about how to get to that, what that underlying message is, because the chances are it's not the presenting thing. So, I mean, if my wife says, you never do the dishes, trust me, it's not about the dishes. So again, is there a particular criticism that you've heard that you have in mind?
Yeah, for example, they say like you have done some mistake or it's not working well, or they criticize our work, right? We don't know, whether that is correct or not. We need to look into actual details, why, whatever he's saying. That is the one point I was asking.
Yeah, so tell me, express what criticism you would hear in that situation.
Yeah, they say like you didn't work well, like manager says, right? We don't know, what he is telling and whether he is telling correct or not. They say in abstract way, right? Sometimes they say like your system is not, your work that is not working. Sometimes they say, right? In simple way.
Well, is that a criticism of you or of the work?
Maybe me, or that's only we have to think about, right? Whether he's criticizing me or he's criticizing the work, we don't know. We need, how we can check that? That's the question.
Well, by tracking them, right? So give me the criticism, and I'll show you. I'll try to respond.
Yeah, as I said, like when something's wrong, right? Something going wrong, some people will blame us, criticize us, right?
Yeah, say the criticism to me, and I'll
so just I said, right? Whatever you have done, that's not working. It's your code is not good. For example, in our case, right?
So there's something
like
about the code that you find is wrong.
It's like this, Ernie.
Yeah.
Your code is full of bugs. This is the criticism, okay?
Yeah.
Now let's take
whatever system you build, it's not, it's a scrap.
Yeah, now what?
Like that.
So you want to have code that works perfectly.
Yeah, it's working perfect, but he's saying something wrong means, I don't know. We need to look into that, right?
Well, I you kind of stay with me on this.
Yes, for example, like he might don't know how to use it, but he criticized like he's my system is not working.
Role play with this. You're the guy criticizing the code, and I'm you, or I'm whoever. Okay.
This is a situation I'm telling, but I'm not able to decide is criticizing me or about code or my work, right?
Doesn't matter.
Arni, let me try.
Let me
try. Madhu.
Let me jump on
Yeah.
it. So,
Madhukar.
sorry. Yeah, Ravi.
Let me try.
One quick question. Let me go ahead because I do see these kind of comments quite often in my work as well. Say there are 4 members in the team. Even though member A contributed more work and more code, obviously he will be opening up the doors for the new issues. So even though the one contributed more, from the manager or someone always gets back saying that, hey, you did so many, these are all the things, but the things what you develop is not working as effective or working perfect. So that kind of criticism maybe Madhukar trying to outline.
So you want to see the code improved so that it's working more efficiently. So how would he respond?
Yeah, we generally say there are a bunch of tasks or things we did.
It's usual. We will get into our work.
Yeah. So here's the thing: don't try to explain before you understand where that person is coming from, and until their energy has been reduced. That's what I call the lookup. In other words, until then, that person is not going to be open to any explanations or disagreements that you have. See, communication is a sender and a receiver. When somebody is angry, when somebody is criticizing, they are not a receiver. They are only in send mode. It's like those push talk things.
Yes, correct. Yes, correct.
So,
they only send.
The purpose of tracking is to get them to where they feel heard and understood. And again, my experience has been that if you relentlessly validate somebody until they feel heard, that it is impossible for them to stay angry. And then once they've been heard and understood, then they are in more receive mode. Until then, it's not going to work. Until then, they are not going to be open to hearing any explanations, any disagreements, or anything.
Okay. Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, we need to dig into that, right? The message, what they're saying, that you mean.
Yeah. And not to take it personally.
Yeah, correct. Yeah.
I mean, it's good. I mean, I write a lot of code myself.
Yeah, what I'm thinking, like, we have to respond him like, okay, what's your problem? Like, maybe we can fix it or something, or that is not my wrong. We have to explain it, right?
Well, again, if somebody is coming at you with that kind of energy, they're not going to be open to hearing any solution or explanation or anything until they feel heard. That's what I'm encouraging you.
Yeah, that's correct. Yeah, that's correct.
Yeah, I think the thing is, I think the emotional response need to be controlled on that particular point. It seems to be like, say, when someone is offended or someone said something to us, we always go on emotional mode, try to respond. That's what I do in general. Maybe somewhere we need to get into a situation and try to control our emotions. But I know it's very difficult. And so we also ask, how do we make it a habit, or how do we make it into our DNA? So those kind of things are interesting to know. How do we do in a natural way? How do we control our emotions? How do we?
That's a very difficult question. And the thing is, emotions and feelings are a spontaneous reaction. They're something that we can't really control. However,
Arni?
Yes.
Did you have the chance to role play thing, or can we continue on the slide, or how do you like to?
I think I'd like to continue, if that's
sure.
Unless,
okay. Yeah.
Yeah. Actually, the very next, I would like to do a role play.
Okay.
I was trying to do one there with. Does anybody have a criticism that they have heard recently about themselves?
Okay. Can I do it, Arni?
Please.
Okay. See, you are me and I am whatever. Okay.
Yes. Right.
Arni, your code sucks.
Yeah. So you want to see better code?
No, everything sucks. Everything about the code sucks.
Everything. So you just want it completely redone?
Yeah. Anything, everything. You know, we don't have time for that. The alignment sucks. The syntax sucks. The bug sucks.
So so maybe you could express what you feel is needed in this situation.
I mean, I was checking the code and it doesn't compile the other day.
Ah, so you want to have compiled code.
Yeah.
And you're confused as to why it wasn't compiling.
Yes. It was compiling before.
Yeah. So you'd like to understand what happened that caused it to not compile.
Yeah, I don't want it to happen again. I can't do it compiling your code all the time.
So you want to be assured that whenever you get code, it will always compile.
Yes.
And that's something that I would like, and I would like to investigate what happened. Now, okay, so tell me how that felt to you as.
So this is what I felt. I was angry, and you're not getting back angry with me.
Yeah.
And my anger did not stay long enough. Means I was only angry for 3 rounds.
Yeah.
And after that, I softened because you are too soft. Like you're trying to see, okay, what is it? So I have to tell to the great point what I really missing in the code.
Yeah, because you know, now if I've given you lousy code, I mean, obviously that's that's on me. And the thing is that if you're coming at me like that way, in other words, we both have exactly the same goal. I mean, my goal is to give you good code. Your goal is for me to give you good code. We're absolutely 100% aligned on that. Now, I gave you crappy code that didn't compile. Okay, so that again, that's on me. And if you know, but when you're coming at me in an angry way like that, the key thing is the anger and not the code. Because again, we both have this exactly the same objective. See now, and this, if I could just kind of turn it around a little bit, if a more effective way than criticism, if I'm now the other person, would be, you know, Ravi, I noticed that the last code that was given didn't compile, and I'm confused as to why that happened. I'd like to be assured that all code that I get will at least compile. Can I have that assurance?
Sure.
Now, do you hear I mean, now wasn't I expressing exactly the same thing that your criticism was?
Yeah.
And yet, now you as Ravi, now to hear that, did you feel criticized?
No.
Yeah, but it was the same thing. In other words, it was the code. In other words, I was expressing, yeah, and this is the flip side of what I call tracking. I was expressing what I wanted in a way that didn't make you wrong, because that's the most effective way to get my needs met. My need is to have good code that compiles. Okay, that wasn't happening. And I was able to express it in a way that didn't criticize. In other words, the criticism is never necessary in order to get your needs met. Now, would anybody else just, how, you know, do you feel fairly complete about that?
I am.
Okay, any questions or comments on what just happened?
So what if we do not agree with their criticism? So we feel that it is wrong what they actually criticize us for. We want to first prove our point that that's not true. So how do we do that instead of acknowledging?
That's a great point. The time to do that is when you have tracked the person down to their lookup. Because as I said, as long as they are angry, they are not going to be receptive to any disagreement or anything else. So, I mean, do you have a specific example in mind?
Okay, maybe let's say somebody says, like our boss, I feel you interrupted in the meeting, you could just wait. But on the other hand, on the contrary, I feel like I was not given a chance to actually speak. I felt that there were others who were, you know, jutting in.
Okay, so all right, okay, can you be the person who's saying, okay, I'll be the person, you know, you in other words, you say that criticism and I'll respond in a role play. Is that okay?
Yeah, yeah, I just have a feedback. I think you should wait for others to talk. You are interrupting too much.
So you felt that there were too many interruptions.
Yeah, I mean, you should give everybody a chance to speak, and you have to wait everybody to complete. I just felt you were interrupting.
So you felt like not everybody didn't have their chance to express everything they wanted.
Yes, yes, precisely.
And you'd like to have the sharing be more equitable.
Yes, yes.
And I agree with that. And I have to say that my experience was that I didn't feel that I was saying anything more than anybody else. And I'm confused as to why it was perceived as being interrupting.
I don't know what has to be responded to that. But
yes, in other words, my point is that I want to validate the other person first, because even though I disagree, and yes, I mean your point is well taken. At some point, if I feel that what's being expressed is not in accord with what my experience is, I want to express that to them. And again, see, communication is a sender and a receiver. And if the other person is criticizing, they're not in receive mode. What I want to do is I want to put them in receive mode by not by trying to manipulate them there, but by trying to hear and validate what they're expressing. And in my experience, when I'm able to validate so that the other person feels heard and understood, then and only then are they going to be open to hearing anything I have to say. Now, and I've talked about tracking as the way that I advocate for doing that. Several other approaches have been mentioned, and whatever works. The key point, though, is to validate first before offering a different opinion. Any comments about that?
Yeah, good.
Okay, so does anybody else have something that they'd like to express as a criticism they may have heard?
No, your examples are so good. The bottom line is you have to bring the person back to communication mode.
Absolutely.
Versus
yeah.
Energy and heated, and each person is different, but the way that you keep guiding with so you want, and your energy in and of itself pulls that person out of that high, angry, closed, it's all send, and then finally they're receiving that starts to happen where, oh, they're listening to me, they're hearing me, and then we can either address, how any kind of solutioning or any kind of dialogue at that point, because it's not really dialogue until you're on the same plane of sending and receiving.
Beautifully put. that was beautifully expressed. Yeah, absolutely.
Oh, thank you. It's extremely helpful to remind. That's extremely helpful. Thank you.
Arnie, there is one more question.
Yes.
Fonda, do you want to ask Arnie directly?
Yes, I can ask. So how do you approach it when people don't want to verbally communicate with you, but the criticism is received like via Slack or instant messenger or something like that? They're not really open, because being in the tech world, I just find that some people just are not open to communicating verbally. So how do you use the same technique when you're typing to them, or just wondering?
Yeah, you've touched on something that I have worked literally for years to try to figure out. Here's the problem. What I hope you noticed in the role plays was the importance of nonverbal cues. And even in this environment, there's at least the nonverbal cue of my voice. And what I was hoping to demonstrate through my voice was acceptance, basically accepting the other person. And that's an absolutely important thing. In fact, the physical nonverbal cues can be just as important, which is why face-to-face is the most effective. Unfortunately, if there's nothing but the text, what I found is that even in the most effective response, the most beautiful tracking statement, if I type it into an instant message or even an email or whatever, the other person will read it and hear it in a voice very different than the one I'm saying. In fact, they may hear it in an angry voice, even though I'm not saying that. So that's the problem is without the nonverbal cues, I have yet to find a way that this works.
I have a suggestion for responding to conflict in nonverbal communication, like in Slack and email, especially when it's private, when it's just you and another person who's expressing frustration, but especially when it's public. My experience is, or my preference, or what I've observed to be effective is to be as clear and explicit as you can, and to communicate about whatever the conflict is as though it is a problem with a solution, right? So if somebody says, for example, like we were talking about a minute ago, your code has too many bugs, all right? In my experience, the best way to respond to that is to be calm, first of all, very calm, like almost analytically, right? It's an engineering problem. Our conflict, since it's been typed out instead of evoked emotionally, our conflict is entirely mechanical in nature. It doesn't have anything to do with emotion. So I'm going to explain the problem in greater detail than you did, which I think Arnie is almost making that gesture of understanding. Like, I concur, there is a problem. It's a problem because of point 1, point 2, and point 3. And I too am interested in solving this problem, and the solutions that I've come up with are A, B, and C. Are there other ideas? Like, how else could we do? Can we change policy? Can we change our process in order to eliminate the problem?
Yeah, I mean, that works really well as long as everybody is kind of on board with it being a problem. And you expressed it beautifully. I mean, and that's really the whole thing, is that once it becomes a problem outside of the personal things, then it's something that you're working on together to collaborate. Where I found that breaks down is when the other person is in an emotional state. In other words, even though they're typing, they're angry and they're not ready to collaborate. They're not ready to hear an explanation. What you expressed is a beautiful way of addressing that when everybody is on board with that way of approaching the problem.
When it's open.
Yeah, yeah.
So,
And in those situations, I mean, I've used something like that. When it's not emotional.
It's funny because in my perception, when somebody's being really emotional and angry and expressive in a typed format, it's much more embarrassing for the person who's being expressive than it is for the person who's receiving the frustration, right? Spoken, it doesn't work that way, right? Like, shame is transmittable in person, but when it's attempted in text, it just goes back on the person that produced it. And I'll share a personal anecdote relating to NVIDIA Slack that happened to me just a few weeks ago. There was, gosh, exactly what the conversation was about. Oh no, it was the what's the name of the new drawing program that we have that was recently released that's really cool. It runs on Windows, and you draw in like the general background pattern, the Moyer pattern almost, of like rocks and clouds and river, and then it uses an AI to generate a really cool programmatic landscape. Somebody made a really cool thread about that, and people were talking about the technology And I said, you know, this should probably be an Electron application, a JavaScript application that runs in like a sandboxed browser. And someone else in the thread like was inflamed by that comment. And they posted like 7 or 8 messages in a row about how stupid JavaScript is and how bad of an idea that is. And I just said nothing. I just, you know, let it go. Because if I responded, if I took the bait, then I, you know, what would I be doing? A public flame war with 18,000 participants?
Yeah, yeah, very good point. I mean, what is the objective here? I mean, and you know, that, yeah.
Right, that's on you. Like your frustration, whatever it is, keep it. You know, you don't even have to, you don't have to engage.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah.
Would you like to continue? We understand that texting is more dangerous than talking. So do you have some, do you have?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, what I mean, yeah, texting is the most ineffective way of resolving any conflict, maybe apart from an internet thread or a Facebook thread. If it's with an individual, what I would text them back and say, I'd like to have a phone conversation to resolve this. In other words, I would not try to resolve it over text, only resolve it over phone. And if they refuse to do that, then basically they're saying, well, I don't want to resolve this. And if that's so, then I can just let it go. But you know, if somebody is angry over text, the most ineffective way of trying to do it is to do anything back by text. If they're angry, then, you know, talk. and I know that's not a popular thing, especially among young people for whom verbal conversations are past. There's, you know, okay, boomer, you know, what's with you? And hopefully, you know, maybe in some future we will have all of our communication only over text. I certainly hope not. And again, the context of everything I'm talking about is verbal interactions. So, and I just, you know, the least effective way. Has anybody ever been convinced on the internet during a flame war? I haven't seen it. Maybe it has. I don't know.
Arnie, what do you think about a scenario where, similar to the earlier speaker, where say nothing, if you can tell the person's inflamed, like if it's a coworker spouting out or someone on a thread, of course, you can always defer to not participate and let them have their rant. But if it is a one-to-one and you reach out there and say, you know, do you have time to talk about it? And they say no, because they're still in that, you know, the walls are still up. But you need to work with this person and evaluate whether or not, is this a big deal or it's going to affect long-term? Or is this a scenario where we can come back later? We often have meetings and, you know, I can quickly set myself a reminder to check back in with them 2 hours later. Have you found any results there where they won't speak to you that first few minutes, but checking back later and saying,
oh, yeah. So in a situation like that, I mean, a lot depends. If I have to work with this other person and they never want to talk, I mean, how am I going to, I mean, including, you know, Zoom or Teams or anything?
Yeah.
I mean, that's, I mean, how am I supposed to work with someone who's never willing to have that interaction? Now, in that moment, you know, so what I might say, you know, maybe respond. So maybe this isn't a good time, you know, when would it be a good time to have a conversation? You know, just, and again, not try, I would encourage not to try to resolve it until there was a conversation. Okay. So I see that we're a little after 1, and this was the time that was allotted. So, and we've been having some questions. Is there like how much slack do we have on the other end?
Arnie, do you have more slides to share, or do you have any topic to more cover, or should we just summarize?
No, that's it. Basically, I just have a shameless plug, which is
yeah.
Which, if you're interested in learning more about tracking, I will be having a Zoom workshop on September 26th from 10 to 12. You can email me at ahbus@consciousawareheart.com for the link. Up here is also my website. And so if you're interested in, this is a free workshop for a couple of hours where I just start with the basics of what this tracking thing is about. And so if you're interested in that, shoot me an email, and again, I will offer this free workshop for anybody who's interested.
Mm-hmm.
But that is all I have.
Thank you so much, Arnie. Thank you so much for educating us today. And for those of you who don't know, Arnie has a PhD in psychology. And Arnie, thank you for teaching us a couple of things here today. You gave us so many techniques and tips, including tracking. You also explained about flight or flight. You also spoke about various criticism, low and high. And you took so many comments online and questions and had a role play. I think this has been a very productive meeting. And I know the subject and the time are not proportional. It's too much subject to cover in too little time.
Yeah.
And you have become a psychiatrist for maybe 30, 40 people in 1 hour. Thank you for doing that.
Okay.
And Abhijit, any announcements?
Yes. Our next workshop is on October 9th. The Magic of the Mindset by Stewart Murray. The Magic of the Mindset. Same time, same link. I'll send an invite in 1 week.
Thank you, Abhijit. And thank you everybody for joining us. It has been a great afternoon.